All right. Tonight, Wednesday, the 27th, and we're going to be going over mod 38 tonight. So, those of you who are going to be watching this at home, I've already got the video queued up. This is crash course psychology number 21. You have that on Blackboard. You have 21 and 22. So, as always, I'm going to have to shut the recording off because otherwise I can't upload it into YouTube. So I will try to remember to turn it back on when we're done. After the video's over, we'll have a discussion about what the video showed us. So I would suggest you watch the video before you go any further in this video so that you can know what we're talking about. All right. All right, as always, these crash course videos are really good, but Hank speaks very fast, and if you're taking notes, it's really hard to take notes that keeps up with his speaking, because he does have a lot of information. So the question I have for all of you is, you all know you have a personality. So if you have brothers and sisters, are their personality like yours, or is it different than yours? Is your personality similar to one or both of your parents? And how do you answer the question, where my personality came from? How was it developed? And my answer to that is our famous biopsychosocial diagram here, which explains it all. First of all, we know the biological side includes your genes, your heredity, and our genetics can determine certain factors in our personality, because certain factors in our personality are biologically based. If you have a very reactive response type of neurological system, well, that is going to affect your personality and your personality development. If we've talked a little bit before about attachment at the critical age of your first year of life, your first 12 months of life, and then into your second year of life, you are developing your attachment to one or more significant other in your world as a infant. And if you don't get secure attachment, then you're going to get one of the other three insecure attachments, and those, how you attach as a child is going to be epigenetically imposed on your biological neurological system. We know that if you, I don't know whether we talked about this in class or not, but if you're in, did I ever talk to you about the rat study where they took the rat babies, they're called pups, and changed them around? I don't think I ever talked about that. Okay, there's some studies from Canada where they were looking at this attachment thing. You know what? We did talk about it a little bit when we talked about Harry Harlow's monkeys and the monkeys that were raised on a wire mother, and monkeys raised on a mother that had a cloth around it. We did talk about attachment there and strength and ego strength and all that. Well, your neurological system is affected by your outside life here, your social side and your psychological side. That obviously you remember these arrows mean that all three of these states are interacting with each other all the time. So what the rat study did was it took baby rats, which are called pups. They took pups from a mother rat that was kind of ignoring her babies. And then they took pups from a baby rat who was very adoring, very attentive to her babies, and they switched them around. So their thinking was, let's look at that nature versus nurture. Are kids raised by a mother who is loving? Are kids raised by a mother who is indifferent and not very attentive? Is it more a biological thing because that's the way mom is and you got mom's genes? Or is it more a sociological thing that what influences you the most is not your genes, but how mom treats you? So they got the answer. They took pups from the doting mother, gave them to the indifferent mother, and they took pups from the indifferent mother and gave it to the mother rat that was very caring and loving. And what did they find out? Yes, there is a difference. And the difference is the mom. Mom trumps social life, environment trumps genes. So the pups that were raised by the loving mother, which included her biological pups and the pups of another rat where mom was indifferent, they all were fine. And the pups that were biologically from the caring mother that went to the indifferent mother, they're messed up. And when I say messed up, what do I mean? Anatomically, physiologically, the stress capabilities of baby rats raised by a caring mother is far superior with that mother than with a mother who ignores. And that sets you up for life. That is a behavioral style and a physiological response which can be measured, because stress can be measured by looking at the stress hormones. And what does the rat do under stress? So we know that your environment as an infant is influenced by your environment, and of course a little bit by your intellectual side, because you're so young, you know, you're not putting a lot together there, but you are putting some together. So that is proof that the sociological side, the environmental side, really overcomes whatever shortcoming you had genetically, and whatever genetic predisposition that you had by being bred by a mother who was very caring, that's negated when you end up with another mother who's not caring. And this is not just feelings. This is measurable, physiological tests that can show how you handle stress better if you grew up with a mother who was doting on you instead of not. So I say, a lot of people say, the biopsychosocial is a personality development theory because it involves your genetics, it involves your social, environmental world, and of course, your psychological world. Now, let's go to Freud because he was the first one to sort of put this together. And he came up with this id, ego, and superego. The id for Freud was basically your animalistic drives. Id is all about drives, whether it's hunger drives, drives to be close to somebody, drives to be sexual, all these things are in the id. The superego is more in the intellectual thinking side, the cognitive side of your brain, and it has a reservoir of what your morality is, what your values are, what thinking you have about how to treat people and how to act. And then, of course, we've already mentioned the environmental, social side. So this paradigm explains how you are influenced as you grow up. Your body is pre-programmed to go into puberty, to go into adulthood, to develop more of your prefrontal cortex until you're about 28 or 29. All these things are pre-programmed. You may remember when we were looking at, way in the beginning of this class, we were looking at synaptic growth, synaptic pruning, synaptic genesis, and if you remember the little video with Roy, who was explaining to us, and we looked at the 3 slides, and I asked you to determine which one was day 1 of life, which one was a 3-year-old, and which one was a 15-year-old. And we looked at the neural development. And he said there are 2 types of development. There's the one that's baked in the cake, that when you get to a certain age, you're going to go through puberty, you're going to be able to have muscle tone that you can walk, and crawl and then walk and that kind of thing. And then there's growth that occurs because of social events and psychological events. So there's 2 kinds of growth. Now, Freud says, okay, we've got these 3 states, id, ego, and superego. Superego is like the sort of angel on your shoulder, the one that whispers to you, better not do that. You should do this. This is what's appropriate. And then you have the ego side, which is just go, 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 all about drive, 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 animalistic drive. Now, where Freud got kind of sidetracked was he associated that with sexual development. So he's the only one whose stages are called psychosexual stage development. And I failed to bring you a handout on that tonight, but I do have one, and I'll give it to you next week. Oh, it'll be on the blackboard, but I'll give it to you next week. So that leaves the ego. What is the ego? The ego literally is in the middle, and the ego is what you're thinking and doing in your rational, conscious self right now. So Freud's theory is a conflict-based theory. You grow, you develop, because these 2 id and superego are always in conflict. Because id is just raw emotion, do it, don't think about it, just do it. And superego is, you better think about it, you can get in trouble, you can do this and that. And then the ego, I think in the next video, you'll see the ego is the referee, and the id and the superego are luchadores. And he's trying to stop the two from beating each other up. So that was sort of Freud's idea, that the ego is like a mediator that tries to come to an agreement. You know, I sometimes use the example, let's say we have an exam on Friday, and you're pretty conscientious and you want to make sure you're ready to take the exam. And some of your friends come to you on Thursday and say, hey, they're having this entertainment, free entertainment or something, free food somewhere, cheap beer or whatever. Let's go out and have a good time. So your id part of you says, yeah, that sounds great. I'd like to have a beer. I'd like to eat some free tacos and hear mariachi music or something. And then the superego says, no, man, you can't do that. You got a test tomorrow, and this class is important to you. Your grade point average is important to you. Your success in academia is important to you, and lays all that guilt on you and whatever. And then the ego's in the middle, saying, well, yeah, I can see your point. It's, you've been studying, it would be nice to take a break. But on the other hand, I can see this point, which is you really don't want to be out late and maybe drinking or something when you got to take an exam at 9 in the morning. So the ego might step in and say, look. I can't go out tonight because I have a test tomorrow. But the test is Friday, and Friday night, the music's still going to be there. The tacos are still going to be there. So let's not go tonight. I'll go with you guys tomorrow if you want to go there. So that's an example of the ego satisfying the id and the superego and coming up with a plan. That's what conflict is. And conflict forces you to do something. It's sort of like that homeostasis thing that I always talk about. The fact that your body wants to be at a homeostatic level that it's used to be. If your body temperature is 98.6, your body wants to have you remain at 98.6. So when the sun goes down on a day like today and the wind is up, you got to put a jacket on because it's too cold not to have a jacket on, because you want to keep your core temperature at a comfortable state. That's homeostasis. And in a way, that's what conflict resolution is. If you're in conflict, you need to resolve the conflict. Do I go out tonight and run the risk of screwing up my exam tomorrow morning? Or do I continue to study and make a commitment to go out tomorrow night after the test is done and no harm, no foul? Okay. Now, this is supposed to be the analogy of the iceberg. And this being the waterline, you can only see the tip of the iceberg, and most of the body of the iceberg is actually below water. So all you see is the conscious part up here. Well, Freud believed that the conflicts are all down here in the unconscious. And in order to get better, the purpose of therapy is to take these conflicts, bring them up into the pre-conscious, and then finally into the conscious during therapy, so we can talk about it and work out an accommodation. So again, being a conflict theory, you can't stay in one place, you can't stay still. you have to do something. You either ignore it, and they mentioned, I think one of our handouts mentions, yes, defense mechanisms with examples: repression, projection, displacement, reaction formation, regression, rationalization, and identification are all defense mechanisms. According to Freud, people use a variety of defense mechanisms to protect themselves from painful emotions, that conflict being raised, and that causes psychic pain, emotional harm. Definitions of 7 commonly used defense mechanisms are spoken of on this handout. And then on the back of it are the 7, no, these are 6, 2, 4, 6 defense mechanisms, and a little bit of description and an example. So that's what happens. In therapy, you bring the conflicts up to your conscious, and then you can deal with it. You can't solve the problem unless it's in your conscious side. And people get in trouble because they are acting on conflicts that are in the unconscious, and they don't understand why they do what they do. You're a person who gets along well with a male supervisor, but when you have a female supervisor, there seems to be a lot of friction, a lot of arguments. So you come in, you see your therapist, and you say, well, I got in a fight with my boss and blah, blah, blah. But you're not consciously saying to yourself, you know, I've taken a look at myself, and I realized I don't like women telling me what to do. If it's a male and it's my boss, okay, I'll accept it. But if it's a woman, even if she is my boss, I don't like it. And therefore, friction occurs, and then I get into some kind of conflict with my supervisor at work. Well, that's coming from your unconscious. And then the issue is, why women? Why do you have an issue with women? Did you have an issue with your mother that you didn't get resolved, or some other significant other in your family that was a female? What is going on? So that's how growth occurs in psychoanalytical terms. Now, okay. Since this is a mod on personality and personality testing, there are at least 2 types of tests that the book is talking about. One of them, well, they mentioned it, he mentioned it. He mentioned it as 2 steps. One was a projective kind of test or inquiry, and then the other one was, and this was traits, and then the other one was like piecing things together, piecing your whole personality together. Okay, so there are projective tests, and then there are other types of inventory tests. So he mentioned the Rorschach, and he mentioned that Rorschach got this idea of having people look at these basically ink blots where you put a ink between a piece of paper, fold it in half, let it touch each other, and then open it up. And so you get mirror images of whatever shapes that were on your ink blot. He figured if other psychologists were doing things like word association, projection test, tell me the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the word pain. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Heart. Okay. Number two. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you see selfish? My sister. Three. Okay, that's word association games. The idea is that your personality is going to respond to those words in a way that a psychologist could listen to that, write down the answers, and come up with an idea about how you tick. Other ones are like incomplete sentence text. Question. I feel the most happy when blank. Something that always makes me sad is blank. And so the idea is the test starts off the sentence, you finish it, and you finish it with a piece of your thinking and emotion. And when I give you a bunch of these, 25, 30, 50, I can get a picture of where you are. This is a projective test. So you do the words, association, you do the fill in the blank. So Rorschach said, well, why can't I just take something like a picture, like an ink blot? Nobody knows the right answer. I feel the most happy when blank. If I want to lie, then I can lie. And if I want to lie to make myself look good, well, what I'll say was, I feel the most happy when others around me are happy. When I see a lot of justice and equality occurring. Those are answers that make me look good. Now, if I want to look good, bad, I feel most happy when I beat the crap out of somebody who needs their butt kicked. So I can show my aggressivity and my sort of criminal feeling. But when you look at a Rorschach ink blot, you don't know what you're, quote, supposed to see and what you're not supposed to see. So if you're being honest, which is always the if, because those tests are all subjective, because you're the one that's taking it. You were a child. Sometimes I do this in class. I'll give you 3 pieces of paper. And on one, I want you to draw a house. On another, I want you to draw a tree. And the third one, I want you to draw a person. And you get a whole sheet to do it. And then you draw your house, you draw your tree, and you draw your person. And then the psychologist looks at what you've drawn. And there are ways that you draw your house. And of course, it's different depending on what age you are, because drawing has a lot to do with your skill set. if you're a 4 or 5-year-old, you can't draw a picture like you can when you're 8 or 9. So then we look at the house and say, well, because you did this or you failed to do this is how we interpret it. Same way with a tree, same way with a person. When you draw a person, we are assuming that that is symbolic of the way you see yourself. And you have little clues, and some people think, of course, this is all lunacy. I'm not one of those people. But if you've got an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and all you're drawing on it is a person, and you take your piece of paper and you draw a person, not even a full person, just a face and maybe a neck or something. And it's really small, like over in a corner. As opposed to the person sitting next to you who draws a big old face and smile and hair and earrings and this and more detail and maybe even teeth and whatever. Again, it depends on the age. And we would say, in general, if somebody draws the person like this and another person draws the person like this person probably has a more healthier view of themselves, of the world. This person doesn't. This person feels isolated, doesn't feel very self-confident. So this is a projective test as well. So, one of your handouts is having to do with the MMPI. So let's talk about that for a moment. I think these questions are more on 39, but that's okay. So I wrote myself these notes so I can remember. Remember, psychoanalysis is a conflict theory. We're talking about projectives as far as testing, personality, and those I just mentioned are all projective tests. Now, if you take a look at the handout that talks about the MMPI, the MMPI is not a projective test. The MMPI is a very interesting concept. There are 10 scales on the MMPI, and you can see it on both these handouts. It says 1 through 0, but really the SI, social introversion, is really considered 10. And only 8 of these are clinical scales, which means they are measuring a mental condition. And if you look at the one handout that looks like this, it has a little bit of definition of, and I'm going to jump up and show you in a minute, a little more description of these 10 scales. First one, hypochondriasis. You've probably heard the word hypochondriac. That's where hypochondriasis comes from. And hypochondriasis or hypochondriac is somebody who's overly concerned about their bodily health. They're always complaining, oh, it's too hot, I'm gonna get sick, or oh, it's too cold, I'm gonna get sick, or somebody over in the corner coughed and they might have COVID and now I'm gonna get it and all that kind of stuff. That's one of the personality dimensions of the MMPI. The next one, of course, everybody knows this one, depression, which of course is characteristically somebody who's pessimistic and hopeless and downtrodden and whatever. Next one is hysteria. This is your high anxiety, overreactive kind of dimension. Number 4 is psychopathic deviancy, which is a measure of how much you disregard social standards. Not in the sense of being a true psychopath, although psychopaths do disregard social standards. And then there's number 5, masculinity and feminine. Well, whether you're masculine or feminine is not a mental disease or disorder. So that's your first one that's not a clinical scale. And when I explain to you how this test was designed, then you'll understand more. 6 is paranoia. Everybody knows what paranoia is. You're afraid, people are out to get you, people are out to harm you, you're very suspicious. That's paranoia. 7 is psychasthenia, which is high anxiety, guilt feelings. That's that category. 8 is schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, of course, is a psychosis characterized by being out of touch with reality and bizarre thoughts and sometimes hallucinations and delusions. And number 9 is hypomania, somebody who's really, really active, overly excited, impulsive. And then number 10 is SI, social introversion, which is not a mental category, but it's a description of how you interact with others and how you interact with the world. So those are the 10 scales. Now, on the MMPI, you have 3 lie tests. So in addition to these 10 scales, you have 3 different lie tests to see whether you are lying or not. Because people do, since it's an inventory, and it's subjective because you're the one that's filling it out about yourself, you can lie. You can lie to make yourself look good. You can lie to make yourself look bad. Well, why would you want to look bad? Well, maybe you got arrested for killing somebody. Like that kid, Isaac, whatever his name was, the one that just got, I don't know if he got sentenced or not, but he admitted guilt to killing all those people at his old high school, and maybe he wants to take a test and make it look like he's mentally ill, so he fakes bad. Or somebody who is mentally ill and doesn't want to go to the hospital, they try to fake good. All right, now let's see if I can pull this up. Wait. Which one it is? All right, did I? Okay, you got Maslow's triangle hierarchy of needs tonight. That's a really colorful one. We're going to talk about that too. No, what? Your other one is incorrect. I do know. Password. Sign into the, who cares? Sign in. No, that's right. Doesn't make me do this at home. I don't know why it's making me do it here. Of course, it doesn't even recognize my correct stuff. We're not going through all this crap. Okay, there's your, don't do it. It's gonna play this game, really? All right. I guess I'll have to do it another way. Let's look at this. These are like sample questions off the MMPI. The MMPI, it comes in a short form and a long form. The short form is not short. It's like 380 questions. And then the long form is like 500 or 600. They're all true, false questions. And you're told, sit down, take the test, don't think about it that much, just read it. And the first thing that impression that you have, true, false, just answer it and move on. Move quickly because it takes a long time to take this test. Okay. Well, look at these nature of these questions. I like Mechanics magazine. I have a good appetite. I wake up fresh and rested most mornings. True? No, that's false. I think I would enjoy work as a librarian. What's the correct answer, true or false? I would enjoy the work of a librarian. You don't know. If you want to act crazy, do you answer that true or false? If you want to act like an angel, do you answer that true or false? You don't know. And since we're giving you the questions, you're not projecting anything. And if you're answering honestly, we'll get a picture as to where you are on those 10 scales that I just mentioned. Yes, ma'am.
The sixth question is really hard considering some might not have their fathers because I have never met the guy.
Right.
Like my father is a good guy. I'm like, is he? I don't know about that. Never
Right. But that's only one question. You have 10 scales they're looking at, plus another 3 for lives. And like I said, you've got hundreds of questions on here. So what they have done, how they created this test in Minnesota, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, this is what they did. They had a bunch of questions. And they went to people who they knew had been diagnosed as depressed, diagnosed as schizophrenic, diagnosed as a hypochondriac, diagnosed as somebody who's psychopathic thinking. And they gave them these questions. And it doesn't matter what the person says, true or false. The only thing that matters is, do schizophrenics on the question, I would enjoy the work of a librarian, do schizophrenics tend to say no, false, and non-schizophrenics tend to say true? So that's what they're looking for. They do an analysis of every single question. They compare it to all of the mental divisions within the MMPI so that they can discriminate. So they just find a question that when you give it to somebody who's been diagnosed as a schizophrenic, they tend to say false on question 7. They tend to say true on question 8. So there are, this is the news, well, it doesn't say it is, but the MMPI is now the MMPI 2. The original MMPI is what I'm talking about because that's what I know. I don't even, but the basic idea is the same. So there are 80 questions for each of these 10 categories. Obviously, there's not 800 questions on the test or the inventory, so some of them are shared. And so in order for you to score high on the schizophrenia side, you have to answer questions that schizophrenic people have answered in the past that point you in their direction. So if you scored every single question the way a schizophrenic would answer, then you would have a raw score of 80. So that would be perfect. You've answered every single one the way a depressed person answers. You answered every single one the way a schizophrenic or a hypochondriac does. So the MMPI says it's really not clinically significant unless you get over a score of 60. So when you're scored on the answer sheet, which I tried to get a copy of and I couldn't, you have your scales down here, 1 through 10, and then you have the 3 lie scales, lie 1, lie 2, lie 3. Shouldn't have drawn the paper that way. This way, there is a division, okay? So here's your score, a dot for how you said on 1, and this one's 2, this one's 3, this one's 4, this one's 5, this one's 6, this one's 7, this one's 8, this one's 9, and this one's 10, okay? So then they draw a little diagram connecting your points. And as you can see, you get highs and lows. So what you are determined is they take the top 2 peaks. Let's say in this case it's a 6, 8. And so that's going to be your primary diagnosis. And the MMPI is the most used personality assessment tool in the world. It has been translated into well over 100 different languages. It's used in business and industry all the time. Law enforcement officers, if you're in a city like El Paso, even a little bit smaller town like Amarillo or someplace, they incorporate the MMPI in their employment interview process. Now, if you're in Anthony, New Mexico or Anthony, Texas, probably not, because they don't have the money to pay for some psychologists to do this. If you are going to join an organization that you need to have a security clearance for, they'll give you an MMPI. They'll give you a polygraph, just like law enforcement. They'll give you a polygraph and they'll give you an MMPI. Because there are tons of records about people who did things well and people who did things not well, and they have their histograph here, this picture. They know what it is, all the way down to all 10 numbers, not just the top 2. So I took the MPI. I took it before I understood how it was scored. And the reason I took it is because I was about to take the class that explains how this test is administered. So once you know how it's graded, you can't take it objectively because you know how it's graded. So I wanted to take the test, all of them, before I knew how they were graded. Because, like I said, once you know how they're graded, then you're not really free to. When somebody shows you an ink blot, you might be intimidated by not wanting to say what you really are thinking. So you can't fake this test out because you don't know what the right answer is and you don't know what the wrong answer is. And if you randomly do it, the system will show that too, because they, like I said, they've done so many of these things. They got books, they got volumes of books. So when I got my test score result, I went and pulled the book off the shelf in the library, looked up my number, and I was shocked at the personality description of real people who scored the same way I did. So this is a very, very popular test. Another reason it's very popular is it's machine scored. All you do is take that answer sheet and send it to the people who produce this. They will grade it, and then they will give you a printout of what that personality looks like based on hundreds of thousands of other people who scored the same way you did, or I did. So psychologists like this because it's easy. Psychologists do not like the Rorschach. One, it's not, as Hank says, it's not proven to be studied and normed to the extent that MMPI is, because the Rorschach involves subjective analysis by the psychologist who's reading it. It obviously cannot be machine graded. And without revealing too much about a Rorschach, I will tell you, if I'm giving you the Rorschach and I have the card, you give the card one at a time. I have the card in my hand, I turn it around, and I hand it to you. What you do with that card, I'm writing down everything. If I have any brains, I'm actually videoing it because I'm probably going to miss something. So if you take, for instance, I'll just give you one example. If you're looking at a Rorschach card and you lift it up and look at it like it's like a 3D, and you're looking at, at the edge of it to see if it's like 3D while you're describing what you see, that's a really bad sign. If you turn it, if you rotate it, that means one thing. If you see color on a Rorschach card where there is no color, that's not good. And the fact that you say things like, oh, that red part, that makes me think of blood. That's not bad. That doesn't mean you're sick or you're aggressive or you're murderous, because most people say stuff like that. So they're judging you against everybody else who's ever taken this test that they have a record of. So the Rorschach is not favored, but I like it. It is a pain in the butt to grade, but it's the perfect example of a personality projective test where the person taking it has no idea what the right answer is, has no idea what you shouldn't say or what you should say. And that's helpful. I'll give you another example. The rules for giving the Rorschach is you have 10 cards. If you don't get 10 responses, then it's an invalid test, because all the normative information where everybody else has taken it, they've all answered at least 10 answers. So if you only answer 8, then the psychologist is not going to use the results of the Rorschach, because it can't be analyzed when there's only 8 responses. However, we do know that if you're truly a person who has multiple personalities, DID,
Isn't it?
they have, in general, they don't answer 10 questions. So it doesn't, if some guy gives you 8, it doesn't mean that he's multiple personality disorder. Differential identity disorder, DID.
It used to be called NPD. It's a DID.
Huh?
It used to be called NPD.
M?
Oh, yeah.
It used to be called MPD, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, multiple personality disorder.
And they changed it to
MPD, and now they changed it to differential identity disorder, DID. So, but it's very rare. All this crap you see on TV, movies, Sybil and the 3 Faces of Eve, and some of it, those people didn't actually have DID, and then others faked it. And one of the most convincing ladies who was famous, I think that's when they did the 3 Faces of Eve on, she turned out to be a fake. Really smart lady to be able to fool people that well, people who were well trained. So, but here's my public service announcement, my PSA. If a person goes to a psychologist to have a psychological workup, which includes personality testing, no competent psychologist is going to give you one personality instrument, period. If they give you the MMPI, which is very likely they would, they're also going to give you other ones. And there's all sorts of other ones that are looking at different things, or, you want to be able to confirm whatever the MMPI says based on other personality exams. Plus, as a psychologist, you're talking to the subject that you're testing, you're interviewing them, you're taking a social history. Hopefully you see them on more than one occasion, so that if you saw them 3 different times, that would be, you'd have a better basis of judging their personality than if you only saw them once and that was it. Okay. Let me go back to my colorful handout here. Because this will act as a segue to humanistic psychology. Abraham Maslow came up with this triangle. We call it the hierarchy of needs. And this is how he explains personality development. He says, look, everybody starts at level 1, the physiological, because you have to be able to breathe, eat food, have water, shelter, clothing, and sleep. These are physiological needs that you have to be met, that you have to have met before you can move up this hierarchy and into your psychological personality development. And if you've got food and shelter and clothing, then if you can do that, then you can move up to the next step, which is health, safety, of course, health, employment, property, family, and social stability. Now, those of you who may cross the bridge to go over to Juarez, you know that there are people on the bridge. Some of them are physically disabled, some of them may be mentally disabled, and they're out on the bridge begging for money because they're missing a leg or two, or they're, like I say, physiologically messed up somehow. And by being on the bridge, when cars are going by, and if you're like in a wheelchair, they're about really, really close to people's exhaust. And, cars are always having to wait because of the gates and the inspection time and all that stuff. It's not a healthy place to be in. But the only reason they're there is because they want to eat. They want to have something to drink. They want to have a roof over their head. And if they don't have family members to take care of them, and the social service net is not taking care of them, then they're participating in begging to live. And that's really at level step 1. Because they are gambling with their safety, their health, and forget love and belonging and esteem and self-actualization. You can't get self-actualized if you're so hungry, all you can think about is getting something to eat. Okay, next, safety. Okay, you can see that it's a level higher than physiological. Employment, family, social stability. And you get that, then you can get to the 3rd level, which is love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, connected to family and to your community. And then if you get there, you can move up to step 4, where you have personal confidence, self-reliance, achievement, a sense of achievement, respecting others, and start individualizing yourself and defining how you're going to be seen by yourself and how others are going to see you. And then the final step is self-actualization. In self-actualization, you got it all down now. You've got your morality, you've got your values, your whatever aspects of creativity, you're tapped into that. You are spontaneous. You are accepting of others, and others are accepting of you. You have a purpose in life. You have peace and balance in your life. And that's why Maslow says you grow on this hierarchy of needs. Now, somebody in this particular diagram put these chakras on the side. I've never seen that done before. That's Indian from India. those are states of mind that Indian philosophy people have come up with. And I don't know what they are. I just don't, had to look it up. And then I'd heard choppers, but I didn't know what it was. That's what it is. It's from India. So, all right, now on the back of this is the big, I didn't even put it on there, should have. The big five. The big five. What are the big five? These are the big five traits that are measured by, coincidentally, the test called the Big Five Personality Inventory. And where this came from, started off with psychology professor Gordon Alport. He had a PhD student, and for his project, he gave him the fattest, thickest dictionary he could find, which is probably about 8 inches thick. And he gave it to his graduate student and said, look, I want you to look through every page in this dictionary and pick out every adjective describing a person. So, adjectives like happy, angry, befuddled, focused, kind, any of those adjectives describing somebody. And so he gathered them all up, and there was a whole bunch of them, over 10,000 of them. And so then he tried to find a pattern where he could narrow them down. Like, for instance, happy. Well, can't you put joyful and happy together? And any kind of words that sort of belong together. Angry, pissed off, irritated, all on a spectrum of really strong words like, well, that'd be 2 words. Let's think of a word that, berserk or something, with anger, as opposed to just mildly irritated. And so they boiled it down to 16 personality factors. And so he called his test, this inventory, the 16 PF. How creative is that? 16 personality factors, 16 PF. So he created this inventory called 16 PF. And I call it an inventory because it's not really a test. It's like this MMPI. You answer questions. And if you answer a question in one direction, and let's say one of these personalities is, I think we have one sort of, okay, agreeableness. On the Big Five is called agreeableness. So let's say, I don't remember the 16, but he had something like agreeableness. Mable, if I can spell mable, I don't know how to spell it. Anyway, somebody who's agreeable with amable, okay? And if they answer questions in such a way, then they are moving towards a descriptor that says they're agreeable. And as always, it's always on a spectrum. So if we're looking at agreeableness, That's on one side, and of course, on the other side is, non-agreeable, maybe hostile. And then you have to be at least here in the middle to be considered agreeable on this side and not agreeable on that side, and then you're really not agreeable over here and really agreeable over here. So when you think about the 16 personality factors, you're really thinking 32, because you can be agreeable or you can be not agreeable. So it's like the negative side. So maybe you could think of it as being 16 times 2, right? Same way with the big five. Contemporary psychologists said, you know what, they're outboard, we don't even want to use 16 personality factors. We want to narrow it down to just 5. And we're going to call them the big 5, because these are like the most important 5 in our view. And we're going to call our test the big 5. And so they came up with an easy way to remember the 5. They created a little mnemonic, which, as you can see, is in bold, called ocean. And each one of these stands for one of the 5. A, of course, is agreeableness. N is neuroticism. E is extroversion. C is conscientiousness. And O is openness. So think about extroversion. Everybody know what an extrovert is? What's the opposite of an extrovert? An introvert. And of course, there's the middle. So, if you look on here, an extrovert is somebody who is outgoing, talkative, sociable, and enjoying social interactions. An introvert is the opposite. They don't like public, they don't like groups, they don't like public speaking, blah, blah, blah. So everybody falls. Some people are so extroverted that they're always out engaging in groups, and they're the first one to say, hey, look, there's a couple of new students in there that I've never seen in this class. Well, they walk over there and introduce themselves. They're extroverts. They like doing that. Other people are shy, and they don't want to do that. They would never do that on their own. And most of us, of course, are somewhere in between, this side or this side. And when we talk about personality traits, this is a trait, agreeableness. It can change based on the environment. Normally, Anna is an extrovert. But when we took her to a reception for people who were thinking of going to Texas Tech University, she didn't act like she normally does. Why? Because she doesn't know anybody. She doesn't know one person in this room of 300 people. Plus, she knows there are people in this group who are going to make a decision about whether she gets admitted into Texas Tech or not. So she doesn't know who to be careful around and who I could be relaxed around. So when my admission to Texas Tech, which is where I want to go to school, is very important to me, I'm gonna sort of hold back until I know who's who, because I might make a mistake. So if we observe Anna at this reception, we would say, I don't think she's very extroverted. She's not introducing herself to people. She's not asking who they are. But if she was here on campus, then she would, because she has friends here, she has faculty here, she knows, she feels more comfortable. We have the ability to move left or right on all of these traits based on the environment that we're in. Same thing is, if I had one of you stand up here and give a presentation on who was Alfred Adler and what does his brand of therapy believe in, and you did your research and you got up and you had your cards to remind you, and you gave a speech and you gave an explanation, students asked questions, you handled other questions, and you sat down and you did great. Somebody watching you might say, wow, she must be an extrovert because she really did a nice job at that presentation. And then you ask her, oh no, I was scared to death. I hate public speaking. The only reason I did it is because it was part of my grade and I had to, I wanted to do it to get extra credit or whatever the deal is. So we do moderate ourselves based on the environment, the situation. So that's why we have to remember as the video, the enduring traits that we exhibit is really what our personality is. If you catch us on a bad day and we're curt, we cut you off, we're not very friendly, you don't realize that something really, really bad happened today, and now you're in a night class and your mind is still on the bad thing that happened today. It's unfair to judge her one time when you saw her under duress and you didn't even know she was under duress, because you don't know how she is normally. But if you see her on different occasions in different environments, then you get an idea what the true personality is. And some people, when they're with their friends, they can be all talkative and laughing and bringing up subjects and being funny and being and all that, but they don't do that in class because it's a different environment. So it's a fluid thing, okay? So, all right, you got your defense mechanisms. This is under Freudian ideas. Now remember, the purpose of defense mechanism is to protect you from emotional harm. So that's why it's a defense mechanism. It's a defense against getting anxious and getting pain. First one, repression, involves keeping distressing thoughts and feelings buried in your unconscious. You go back to the iceberg, and if something bad has happened to you and you don't want to think about it, then you repress it. Jam it down to the unconscious so you don't have to think about it. And it can pop up again. Projection, this is always a good one, involves attributing. We talked about attribution in social psychology when we had that section in the last 2 weeks. Involves attributing one's own thoughts, feelings, or motives to another person. So, a woman who dislikes her boss thinks she likes her boss, but feels that the boss doesn't like her. So, she's projecting on the boss that the boss doesn't like her because she doesn't like her boss. So she's projecting, well, I don't like that person and I'm sure they don't like me. Well, you don't know that. Displacement, we all know that one if we've had brothers and sisters. We get mad, somebody scolds us or does something mean to us, and we turn around and act that way against somebody who's younger and smaller than we are. You had a bad day at work, you open the front door, and your little dog is so happy to see you since you've been gone all day, and runs up to you, and you give him a swift kick across the living room. Because you're so mad, you're displacing the anger that you had at your boss, which you can't show because you'll get fired, so you keep it repressed for a little while, and you get home and your dog's trying to give you a little love and attention, you end up kicking him across the living room. Reaction formation involves behaving in a way that is exactly the opposite. So you don't like people of a different race, so instead of admitting that and doing something about it, you act like you're overly friendly to somebody of a different race just because you're trying to deal with the conflict in yourself. Regression is one we should be familiar with. Involves a reversion to immature patterns of behavior. Say you're 4 years old. You were potty trained when you were 3 years old. Then the UPS driver runs over your truck, runs over your favorite dog. So now you're depressed and you're sad. And what happens? You start peeing the bed at night and pooping your pants in the daytime. When you've already been through that stage, it's not been a problem. Why? You're regressing to the past when the dog was still alive and you still had that loving relationship with him, and you felt more comfortable back then because you didn't ever think about the fact that your dog could get killed and then you would have to deal with it. One of the things that I had to do as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney is I worked some murder cases. So I have seen black and white and color pictures of dead people who were shot or stabbed. And to every one of these people who were killed that were not immediately killed, like shot in the head and boom, that's over. If they were shot and then they bled to death and they knew they were dying, or they were stabbed and they were alive, but then they eventually died, they eventually, if they can do it, they crawl up into a ball, a fetal position, which of course, literally is mimicking the way you were when you were in your mother's uterus in a fetal position. If you got sick tonight and you live alone and you felt like you were getting the flu or you're worrying about COVID-19, you could very easily go into your bedroom, get in bed, throw a cover over you, and crawl up and hug yourself in a fetal position, and then call mom on the phone. That's regression. It's not bad. It's a defense mechanism. Rationalization, you of course rationalize if that idiot was not walking in the street without any reflective clothing on and in a place where there was no overhead light, and you hit him with a car, it's his damn fault because he chose to walk out on a street that was dark and he didn't have light clothing on or reflective clothing on. So I'm justified in doing what I did. The example they say, a student watches TV instead of studying, saying that additional study won't do me any good anyway. I need to relax. I'm gonna watch some Netflix. Identification involves bolstering your own self-esteem by forming an imaginary or a real alliance with somebody else or group. Join a group so that you can get a group identity and build up your self-esteem. All right. So the backside of that is just more description. So you should have a pretty good group idea of that. Okay, how are we doing for time? All right, we got 8:45. Well, let's take a look at, okay, here's the good news. You only have 2 mods, 38 and 39. And you got the whole week to do 38. Next week, we'll do 39. But you got both 38 and 39 tonight. So you don't have to wait until next week to start working on 39. So next time we meet, you should be able to have your questions answered, if you have any, on mod 38 and 39. So we're going to spend more time, like tonight, lecturing, and you've got videos that support what we're talking about on Blackboard. So let's take a quick look at some of these questions, even though you just got them tonight. Well, that's not true. They're on the Blackboard. Maybe you took some time to look at it. But tonight you have them in your hand, so you can take a look at it. And I already mentioned number 1, because Hank had a better definition of personality than what our book authors gave us. But number 1, it's obvious the answer is B, personality, right? And then I mentioned the behavioral consistency. What Hank said was an enduring characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. So number 2 is, of course, behavioral consistency, meaning that's the way you act most of the time. Not 100% of the time, but most of the time. That's your personality. And number 3 is just an example of personality. So that's not so exciting. Number 4, trait theories were built upon both psychoanalytical, which is Freudian psychology, and humanistic theories. So when they looked at those traits, when Alford and others for the 16PF and the Big Five, they incorporated ideas, personality development ideas. But remember, trait theory doesn't explain how you got what you got. It's like the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. It is a descriptive book that describes what it is if you have paranoid schizophrenia. What symptoms would I be looking at if I was working in the emergency room and some patient came through and was acting in such a way? How would they be acting if they were paranoid schizophrenic? I'll look it up in the DSM-5. Well, I guarantee you, if you're working in the ER, you already know what schizophrenic looks like, acts like, because they end up in the ER all the time. So you really don't need to be told what the characteristics of a schizophrenic are. And there's more than one type of schizophrenic. And paranoid is the one we hear the most about. Number 5, which contemporary theoretical approach is most directly descended from Freud's psychoanalysis? Well, obviously the answer is psychodynamic. For most people, it's one and the same. There's no important reason to discriminate between psychoanalysis and psychodynamic. I don't know why they do it. They think they're cool. It doesn't. What I tell you is, look, this is what you need to know. If you ever take an exam, like an entrance exam to get into medical school, MCAT, law school, LSAT, graduate school, the GRE, graduate record exam, they're going to have some questions, general intelligence questions. Remember when we were talking about G intelligence? Back when we were talking about intelligence? You're going to see questions. Obviously, my daughter took the MCAT. I paid for a review course, so I looked at the questions. And the psychology questions were almost always about Freud. Because Freud is, well, and this is so stupid too. In these question bank, one of your questions is, who's the most famous psychologist? Answer, Freud. But Freud wasn't a psychologist. You can't call him a psychologist just because he came up with these theories. He was not a psychologist, he was a physician. He wasn't even a psychiatrist. But that's beside the point. Here's the point I want to make. Freud. Anybody who talks about conflicts, as we talked about tonight, conflicts or conflict theory, anybody who talks about childhood experiences, is Freud and psychoanalytical. Anybody who talks about dreams or dream analysis is Freud. Anybody who talks about free association, which is a technique, is analytical or psychodynamic, whatever you want to call it. What else? Oh, unconscious feelings, whatever. Freud's the only one who talks about it. Let's see what else I can. Trying to think of the name of the term. What? Well, what I'm thinking of is projection. I'm not sure that's the right word I want to use. I'll think of it. Anyway, if you see any of these words in a question, the answer is going to be Freud, or psychodynamic, or psychoanalytic, or analytical. They're all the same. There's no practical reason at all to differentiate between psychodynamic and psychoanalytical. They want to say that psychodynamic is a more newer neo-Freudian. Well, so what? So that was number 5. Number 6. What's the answer to number 6? Is there one of those magic words in there? There's 2 of them. Unconscious conflicts and childhood experiences. Answer? Got to be B, psychodynamic theories, based on what I just wrote on the board. 7, psychodynamic theories emphasize that personality involves a dynamic interaction between conscious and unconscious levels. Conflict between unconscious and conscious. These are the kind of questions you're gonna see, not just on your exam next week, but quite likely on the GMAT, GRE, I know they're on the LSAT, I know they're on the MCAT. They're probably on the nursing national board test that you have to take. Because nursing, of course, cycles you through the mental health side. In addition to the other specialties that you have under nursing, you have to cycle through the mental health side. Number 8, do you see one of those magic words in there that's on the board? Like the very first one? Conflicts. Boom! Psychodynamic. Number 9, psychoanalysis refers to the personality theory, therapeutic intervention practices developed by Sigmund Freud. By the way, answer number A, which looks like Karen Horney, but it's not Karen Horney. She might be horny, but her name is Karen Horney, and she is a neo-Freudian, as well as Carl Jung and Albert Adler were both, all three of them were students of Freud. Number 10 is the one I just told you about. Which of the following psychologists is the best, the most well-known? Answer, Sigmund Freud. Well, Sigmund Freud wasn't a psychologist, so it's kind of a stupid question. And then they clarified, oh, well, actually Freud was a physician in 11. So, okay. Now, how did Freud get involved in psychological issues? He graduated from medical school in Germany, and he was thinking of where to set up his medical practice. And someone suggested to him that he go to Austria because in Vienna, that's an ocean port. And in the time that Freud was walking around Earth, Vienna was a fast-growing metropolitan city because of all the trade that was going on. And they said, why don't you go there? Because there is a well-established middle class, and an upper middle class is growing in that city because of all the trade and commerce that was occurring. So that's where he went. And he started seeing all sorts of patients. I actually have never looked it up, but I believe he was probably what we would call an internal medicine physician today, or even a general practitioner, but I think he was a little more focused on adults. So I think he was would have been considered an internal medicine guy. And in this area, it was a man's world. So the men were businessmen and merchants, and they were busy doing their job and then also going to the taverns and doing socializing and back patting and, you know, maybe soliciting new clients or whatever. So their wives, who were stuck at home, either by themselves or with the children, they didn't have a lot to do, because if their husbands were middle class, they had enough money to hire nannies to take care of the kids, to clean the house, clean the clothing, cook the food. And so the wives didn't have a whole lot to do. They didn't have novellas to watch on the TV. They didn't have coffee clatches, groups, could meet down at Starbucks. So they just sort of did it on their own. And a lot of them started getting neurotic. And they started manifesting symptoms of a true illness, like a paralyzed arm, or throwing up all the time, or diarrhea all the time, headaches. And Freud would examine them and come to the conclusion, the correct conclusion, that there was nothing physiologically wrong with them, biologically wrong with them to be having these symptoms that they're having. So he started thinking, why are these people complaining of nervousness and numbness? Illness that there was no medical sound reason for them to have, but yet they did have it. So he started figuring out that people were having these problems because of the way they were thinking. There's a mental process involved, and that's why their stomach is spastic, and they're feeling sick, and they're having headaches, fainting, paralysis. It's because of their thinking. When I say it's in your mind, they literally mean it's in your mind, which doesn't mean that it's not real to you. So that's what got him thinking about mental processes was leading to their physical illness. And that's why he came up with these theories. Then he started thinking of his own life and his own experience, and was attributing a lot of these people's problems to their relationships with their husbands or families today, which is built on when they were a child, how they were treated and what kind of relationships they had. So those of us who strongly support this idea of attachment theory, that people can be healthy attached, and unhealthy attached, secure attached, insecure attached. That happens when you're a child. 0, day 1 of your life till around 2 years of age, you're developing your attachment style. And if it's not good, then you're going to have problems. So he attributed that to your childhood experiences. He's the only one who does that. There's no other theorist that talks about childhood experiences affecting you as an adult. The part that he got wrong was all this sexual part, that it was a part of a drive that was associated with sexual drive as a child. Most of us, well, not most of us, I mean, everybody has rejected that idea. Although we still talk about things like somebody being anal retentive or anal. Why is that guy always arguing about don't touch his papers or don't move anything on his desk or something? Somebody said, oh, he's just anal retentive. What does that mean? Well, anal retentive is literally squeezing your anus tight. And the personality manifestation of problems in the anal phase, which is phase 2 of his 5 stages, can end up with somebody being very stingy And don't mess with my stuff, don't touch my stuff, don't play with my toys, don't do any of that stuff. And there are people who still certainly believe that those personality factors got their beginnings in childhood, but it didn't have anything to do with sex. And so nobody really believes that. But people do, and I'm one of them, put beliefs in childhood experiences affecting you as an adult. The one you hear the most about is what I mentioned before, attachment theory, but it also has to do with people, you've heard people who are orally fixated. People who are orally fixated, like kids who, because they can't talk, they put things in their mouth to test the world. If you're 3 months old and you're in your crib and somebody hands you a rattle for you to play with, the first thing you're going to do is grab it in your hand and stick it in your mouth. Because your mouth is your focus when you're at that age, because your mouth is how you get fed and live. So people who are adults and who did not successfully go through the oral phase and get all their needs met, then they are still working on it. So they overeat, they talk too much, they smoke cigarettes or eating because they want their mouth occupied at all times. They like breast, men are fascinated with big breasts because they didn't get enough breast when they were a child. And, people laugh that off, but you start doing a good social history on somebody and you might find out some pretty interesting things about them. So, all right. So the answer to 12 was D, made no neurological sense. They had physical symptoms, but there was no medical reason for them to be having those. And so number 13 is just an example. See, normally when I do these study guides, I cut out the examples because they're just repetitive. But I didn't do that this time because we've got a whole week just to do 1 month. 14, Freud believed that certain troubling symptoms could be traced to painful unconscious memories. This led him to suspect that these symptoms resulted from psychological processes. All right. I think you will find this study guide pretty straightforward. No curveballs in there. Now that you've got the handouts, you've seen one of the videos, number 21, from Hank's presentation. Number 22 is just more personality stuff, which is also posted on Blackboard. All right, so all 3 of you are up to date on all your exams. Nobody's missing anything.
Was there one last week? Last week?
We had a test last week. Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Did you miss it? Okay. Huh? I had a look. Just shoot me an email, so I'll open it up for you.
Do I specify which test it is so you know which one to review or like open up or?
Yeah. See, the test is closed now. So I can either go in and open it for everybody, which I don't mind doing that, or I can open it up for individual people. So you two have missed it. So I probably apply just to open it. So, let's see, today is Wednesday, so I'd be inclined to like give you until next Wednesday to complete it, so you have like time this weekend.
So it will be open on Thursday?
Well, yeah, it depends on how I feel when I get home. I'll do it tonight if I've got the energy, if not, I'll do it tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I missed it too, because I looked, but I never saw it open.
Well, maybe there was a problem.
Sometimes that happens.
Wow, well, if that's the case, then I probably screwed up. So, all right, well, then I'll just send a message to everybody and say, if you missed it, it's gonna be open, you've got this much time to do it, so. Yeah, that sounds like a operator error from the instructors, that's what that sounded like, so. That's all right, we'll fix it, no big deal. If you need more time, then just let me know, we'll work it out individually, but this time, I'll give you, until next Wednesday. Because I don't want you trying to do one thing while you're doing another thing at the same time, so. That should be, if you're ready to take it this weekend, you should be ready to take it shortly, if you review again, okay? And it also gives you a chance to ask questions if you weren't here in class to ask any of the questions off the study guide. All right? All right, well, thanks for being here.
See you next week.